Hello, my name is Hollie Fifer and I'm a documentary filmmaker and impact producer living and working on Wurrung Country in Melbourne, Australia. Introducing the filmmaker in me, I've been a filmmaker forever, and then an impact producer is a natural extension and how I can be an activist and a filmmaker at the same time. I started making The Opposition back in 2012. I was in Papua New Guinea researching a political coup, and then this strange turn of events happened, and I then got introduced on my second day of filming, actually, to this community, and they were being demolished. I didn't know them, but they were being demolished by hundreds of drunk policemen and 4 bulldozers who were just tearing through this community. And without even talking to anyone, they just allowed me to film this, and they were encouraging me to film this. And so suddenly I spent sort of, maybe 6 hours with this community without a word being spoken. But I had then at the end of the day, an incredible amount of footage of this human rights abuse that had occurred to them. And I went back a month later and met with them again and asked them, what was that about? And who's responsible for this? And I immediately met Joe Moses, who was the community leader. And he was the one who told me that an Australian-run company was trying to build a hotel on that land, which infuriated me. And I saw the spark of passion in Joe's eyes, who was going to take them to court and to try and get justice for his people. And then we just started making The Opposition together, and took good 4 or 5 years, but we got there in the end. So during that making of The Opposition, we were trying to fundraise, and then we got into Good Pitch Australia in 2014. And that's when I got introduced to the idea of impact producing. What happened was I then understood how to do partnership building around the film, and I understood how to build a strategy and figure out my target audience based on who needs to see it and who's responsible for changing the situation. And then I really understood what I was doing. Before that, I was guessing. I was just following my nose. But then I learned how to make that strategic. And it made sense because I was basically following an injustice. So it made sense then to build an impact campaign around the film. So we didn't really need to design an impact campaign because the community had their own. From the very first day I met them, they were going to take the company to court and they were going to fight for justice for the community. So therefore it made sense not to build something new, but to just follow them and help them and support them. But what the main obstacle was that at the end of the film, Joe is in hiding, and he was in hiding for 2.5 years after the police tried to arrest him without an arrest warrant. And he feared for his life. He lived basically in a big white box and didn't move. So we knew we needed to get Joe safe. And from there, then we could take the goals that the community have and that Joe have and then build on them. But we couldn't start that work until Joe's safe. So that was our first impact goal. And we managed to, with an amazing array of international partners, get Joe asylum in the UK for 5 years. And that was because of Jess Search, that was Doc Society, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, Protect Defenders, Frontline Defenders, Jen Robinson as a lawyer. You know, that was an incredible amount of NGOs and UN support and lawyers and helpers to try and get that to happen. And then once Joe was safe in the UK, then it was like, okay, now what's the community's impact goals? An impact workshop with the community to try and get what that is. And they really had 2. So that became our second and third one. One, they wanted Paga Hill, that's the community that they are. They wanted their community to be a model. They wanted to get the word out. They knew for them it was too late, but they wanted to get the word out to other communities that this could happen to them and that they needed to start strategizing their defense early. So basically, there was a bunch of youth leaders that gathered together in Papua New Guinea who used the film to go around Papua New Guinea and villages and settlements and say, if you're at risk at forced eviction, you can't wait till the bulldozers are at your gate. It's too late. You need to start strategizing. What's your media plan? What politicians will you reach out to? Who are your lawyers? How much funding do you have to defend yourself? Are you certain who your community leaders are, that they'll be able to take you through this? Do they need training? All of this sort of thing. So they ran these workshops. 200 communities got screened to in PNG, which is a huge number considering that we basically were able to, we couldn't even go there because at this point the court cases were piling up behind us and we were in Australia trying to fight the battles. So that was an amazing effort for the youth leaders to do. The third impact goal that we had was to get compensation for the community who had been evicted. And unfortunately, that impact goal never got achieved. I do have one sort of lesson from that, and that is that I don't think shame is a social justice technique. We were trying to shame this company, saying that they'd done the wrong thing and that they needed to compensate and they needed to pay the community. And instead of compensating, they just hid and refused. And then would sue us. So it's not a very good technique to try and shame a company or to shame anyone into doing the right thing. Unless they have another reason, I don't think shame is enough. So we failed on that one, unfortunately. Yeah, so I guess, we're Australian filmmakers, so we really didn't feel like we had any right to be able to make an impact campaign that wasn't generated from the community itself. So in a way, it was basically just trying to provide the support and the film as a tool to be able to help the community do what they wanted to do. And therefore we could generate partners or funding or a safety campaigns or a media strategy to try and help them get more support for whatever goal they had. And I think that worked on the whole. It really worked because they then felt seen and they really understood why they were part of a documentary and what the uses of a documentary are. So we started building partnerships after Good Pitch Australia. That's how we learned how to do that work and how to talk about ourselves to different people. And we knew at that point that we didn't have a budget for lawyers to check the film. So that was one of the main things we wanted. We ended up having the film checked 6 times, and 6 or 7, because there was one in US as well. And then when we got sued later on, we would then just call on the same lawyers that checked the film. And they knew every sentence, every word, every inch of the film intimately, and all the evidence that we had to support ourselves. So they were then impassioned to help us further if we got into trouble. So that's how we built the legal structure around us, because we didn't kind of stop with one opinion either. If we got one lawyer to check it, we kind of wanted another one. And then it sort of snowballed. Our funders wanted another one. So we ended up having it 6 or 7 times. But that was amazing because we really did need them in the end. Our other partners were built even on the festival trail. When we went to speak, say, at the anti-corruption conference in Panama City, and we did a screening of the opposition there, we found out that the UN Special Rapporteur was an attendee. And so he actually was helping Joe get asylum because we met him at this conference. So it was kind of wherever we went, we tried to build different partnerships according to what we'd need. And one thing that really helped us with, especially with the asylum thing, was to use the right terminology. We didn't really understand how to build partners for Joe until we called him a human rights defender. And as soon as we used those words, those 3 words, it unlocked all of these NGOs that were specifically for human rights defenders, or all of these funding streams that were specifically for human rights defenders. And before that, we were calling him a community leader, but we really needed to use the right words, and then the partnerships unlocked. I think if you're trying to do a human rights film or corruption or something where there's a high risk, where you have evidence in the film that you need to back up and you need to stand by, I think it's important to get a lawyer to check it, because sometimes it's not quite clear, can you say this or can you say that, or is that right word okay? And sometimes we did have to change a specific word or change a sentence in the film because of what the lawyer said. But also to check in every territory, is that okay for you to say? Because it's about where you distribute your film. If you distribute it in England or if you distribute it in Africa, it's two different laws that you're then having to navigate. But especially if your film is risky, if you're saying anything controversial, then you definitely need a lawyer. Yeah, I think there's a number of different media lawyers around the world who will help. There's sort of a, yeah, I mean, pro bono legal support. If you advocate for the film and say this is important, this is why it's happening, and you really need some help, some lawyers, sorry, will totally give you pro bono support. And it's just about trying to build the partnerships and say the reason for it. It's like building any partnership. You'd want to give and you'd want to take, and they want you to take them on the journey of the film as well. I think they want to feel like their work is important. And if you've got a story that is going to come out and is going to expose something big, then they might really feel impassioned to help you. Yeah, Joe, through a number of different conversations, was getting more and more scared that he wasn't able to get out of hiding by himself. That's where he is at the end of the film, and he stayed there while we even edited the film. And there was a number of different attempts to try and figure out what to do, but nothing worked. And I worked for a few years trying to figure out what to do by myself, but it actually wasn't until we just started taking action that things started moving. So what we did was we had an invitation to the International Anti-Corruption Conference in Panama. And we realized that Panama is a country that Papua New Guineans can go to without a visa. And they can stay there for 6 months. And so we thought, okay, this is an opportunity. Let's just do it. We don't even have any money to do this properly. We don't have a plan, but we actually just started. And it wasn't until we started that then the plan kind of came every step under our feet. It just kept evolving, because we wouldn't have built momentum otherwise. So what we did was we found there are countries that he could go to in transit without a visa. And we actually went the opposite way around the world to try and get him through Singapore and Amsterdam and then Panama City. And then we just started there. And then we met the human rights special rapporteur on human rights defenders. And we said, there is a delegate in this conference that needs your help. He's just flown in from Papua New Guinea and he can't go home. And one good thing about the special rapporteur is if someone asks for their help, they can't refuse it. But the special rapporteur can't also offer it. So we sat them together. It took a while, but eventually Joe said, I can't go home and I need your help. Do you know what to do? And then the UN Special Rapporteur said, well, you've just used the magic words. You're now part of my mandate. Stay in Panama City and I will try and activate my networks and I'll come back to you. It took about a month, but then we had a phone call from frontline defenders saying, we've heard that you're stranded in Panama. Do you need some money? We said, yes, desperately. We don't know what to do when we're stuck here. And they sent us $3,000 by Western Union. And slowly we were able to figure out the next step and the next step and the next step. And then they said, great, stay there. We'll try and find somewhere to go. They sent us a list of all the countries Joe could get to without a visa. And so I took it to Joe and said, pick a country. And he said, England. And so we found a university in England that would take human rights defenders on a free scholarship. And so he started studying law in London. So slowly these things started happening, but it just took us doing it rather than having all the pieces at the beginning. Yeah, so while we were shooting, it was very well, it was safety was a big risk, and it was a bit scary sometimes. So the privilege that was afforded to us because we were Australian was what helped. So basically, I don't think a Papua New Guinean who lives in Port Moresby would be able to make the film, because their house would just get raided and the footage would be stolen, and the film would stop, or their camera would be broken. So we went every time for only 10 days without an announcement. So we would arrive on Saturday at 10:30, and that was the tea break at church. So we would just arrive at the tea break, and we knew the community would be there always, and we'd just say, good morning, could we film with you this week? And they'd say yes. And it would take about a week to 10 days before the company knew we were there. And then they would start following us, and it would be much more risky. But by then we'd finished and we were flying back out. So it was, that was our strategy for trying to film, and then taking the footage with us back home, back to Australia, meant the footage was also safe. And we would fly with it in multiple different suitcases and leave one in PNG and fly with different ones, so that even if we got stopped somewhere along the way, we'd be safe. I've also done a bit of filming in Colombia and in India, and there's always been somewhat of a safety risk wherever I've filmed, but I think PNG takes the cake. I think that was the one where I had to pull out every strategy I could think of. I think it's important to sit your team down together and talk about safety and security very, very early on. As soon as you've got an idea of what you want to film, and then okay, this has got a bit of a risk to it, just because of the location, or maybe it's the topic that you've chosen. If you sit your entire team down, like don't even, your cinematographer, your sound recorders, your producers, your directors, everyone, and come up with a plan together. Doc Society Safe and Secure Toolkit is a really good place to start, just as a first discussion, and then you can see what you need to go deeper on. But it kind of needs the entire team to be very well in tune with each other. You need to know exactly what platform you're going to communicate with, and what happens if you don't hear from that person for a while. What's the plan that then gets activated while they're away, or while they're not in communication with you? What happens to the footage? How many times do you have to back up your footage, and where's all the locations where it's kept? And all of these really tiny details that come into play. And when you need them is too late. You really got to sit down together and work out every single step and have it written down, because when an incident happens or something becomes unsafe, it's too easy to not think properly. But if there's a procedure to follow, then it helps you. And then you go, okay, I'll just do what we said we'll do. And I'm going to trust that everybody else is going to do the action as well. And then you also build that trust within your team, which is really nice. Yeah, I've been wondering when it is appropriate to stop the film. If the film is creating a safety risk, at what point do you say, okay, I'm just going to stop this now? I think it's when you have to be honest about whether it's creating harm or not. Is the film itself creating too much exposure and actually only perpetuating the harm that's out there, or escalating the situation? And I think then it's time to take a little break and to figure out why that is, and whether or not you can keep going safely, or whether or not the film is actually harmful. And if the film's harmful, I think it is time to stop. If the protagonist of the film says, I'm too scared, I don't know what to do, I think it's also time to stop. For us, with the opposition, we actually had this, we talked to a lot of experts about this, and what they said was, if you have a human rights defender or a community leader who's in danger, often the exposure that you get through media or through documentary can actually create a safety for them, because then someone's watching them, someone knows their whereabouts, and if anything happens to them, you kind of know who's responsible, and it creates a deterrent. So sometimes filming can actually create that safety. It's not always necessarily harmful. So we really were thinking one way about the film. We were sort of the small human rights film from Papua New Guinea, which probably no one was going to see unless something dramatic happened. And something dramatic did happen. So when we went to Hot Docs, we got into Hot Docs, we then put a press release out, and then immediately we got sued. And then we went into the courts. So we had this moment that was, I guess it was an obstacle, and it was very annoying and very hard to deal with, because we just wanted to premiere the film in Toronto. But we actually used that and said, you know, this film is being censored, this film is being sued, and it created a buzz that people wanted to know about it. We didn't tell them even what topic it was. We just called it the censored film, and that something was happening. And people kind of wanted to know about it. So then we got a lot more press internationally than we would have otherwise. And what generally happens in Australia is that if the international community are talking about something, then the Australian media will talk about it. But it's very hard to get it on the page, on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald like we did, unless the international media were talking about it first. So I guess Australians don't like to listen to themselves, but they'll follow the rest of the world first. So I guess that was our strategy, was to bring the film international and try and get a buzz going with this censored idea and the fact that we were being pushed into the court system. And then hopefully the media will listen. And the other thing we tried to do was, when we got sued, we actually got sued by an Australian woman, a white woman. So this was then not the point of the film. The point of the film was the injustice to the community. So in a way, the court case was sidelining our media strategy and making everyone talk about this court case. So we then had to figure out a way of figuring out, okay, how do we get every article to then put the 2 minutes of demolition footage at the beginning, so that everyone knew this is about a human rights abuse, and they can meet the community and say, this is their home, this is the community, and this is what they're fighting for. Instead of, you know, the community kind of getting lost in all of that and not being heard properly. So we had to change along the way according to what obstacle we were facing and how we could shift it and change it so that we could use it to our benefit. We actually had to have a, I don't know what they're called, like a media strategist, because, and it wasn't just a publicist, like this person was very, he's an expert in when someone's trying to attack you in the media, what do you do? It was almost like a media defense strategy or something. And he was amazing because he would do media training with us, and he would try and figure out ways in which we would get the story out that we wanted, not what the story that everybody was pushing on us. And that was very important. So I would say it's not so important to get media outlets to partner with you, but more find 1 or 2 experts who have done this before and who know what they're doing. Maybe that's a publicist, or maybe that's this sort of deeper media strategist that can help. And then they have their partners and they can unlock that for you. So we, over the course of the years, we had a number of different impact producers. I think me and the producers were the consistent ones, but the impact producers changed a little bit, and all of us would be doing the socials and the pushes and whatever was happening at the time. And we also had the community have their Facebook page and their Instagram page, and then we would link them up and share content. So it was all sort of everyone chipping in, I guess. So when we went and found out we had a world premiere at Hot Docs, we actually got sued pretty much the next day. And this was the company paying one of their employees to sue us to take out the human rights abuse footage that was in the film and their appearance that's in the film. So we basically went to court in New South Wales in Australia to figure out whether or not we could publish the film or not. So while we were trying to distribute it, we got delayed about 9 months, which is actually pretty quick for the court system. It could have been much longer, but we had to try and advocate to the judge that a film only sort of lasts 12 months. And then if you don't utilize that 12 months, then it becomes sort of an old story. We actually used the analogy of a cake. We said, this is a well-cooked cake. It's going to go moldy. You really need to get it out and eaten. And that was the only way the judge could understand it. So we ended up fighting that case and winning, thank goodness. But it really was a very strong strategy from the company to try and stop the film ever being published at all. So with the community, this is really the sad part of everything. So they did get relocated, some of them, and some of them got left and they had to find their own new shelters. But even the ones that got relocated are still now being evicted again. So the situation in Papua New Guinea with this community is not good, and it's not good for a lot of communities. This was one of the first ones to be evicted, and many more have been evicted since. So it's a big sort of casualty of the development that's happening around the city, is that communities that are living on the land are being pushed out to make way for big developments and hotels and highways and whatever else is going on. So yeah, we couldn't stop that strong progress. You know, what is that? It's if it's not for the people, then who are you progressing it for? But unfortunately, they're still struggling. I hope we did shine a light on forced evictions in the country, because yeah, I think a community could be displaced and no one would know about it. And then it could happen again, and still, when is the point in which everybody gets angry and says, this is enough?